Yeah, the question of what got us where we are today, I often frame that as, when did we become the bad guys? Because I think that's the narrative that's spread now. It's like, where was this point where men suddenly started acting out? And that's two assumptions there. There's one that there was a time before when everything was okay. And there's also an assumption that men are doing lots of damage now kind of intentionally. I think they're two kind of assumptions that are not helpful. Because if we look back on the past, yes, the history of men is a bloody one. But that's the history of humanity. The history of humanity is a bloody history, wherever the world you're from. You know, even if we go back, I know there's these sort of idolized images we get of, if we could go back to when we were just happy kind of hunter-gatherers living at one with the land, worshipping Mother Earth and all that. And it's bullshit. Like, the history shows us that never happened. If you chart the history of men of humanity moving from Africa, the cradle of humanity, out, archaeology shows us that when we met another tribe, we largely slaughtered them, right? Or enslaved them. And if there was an animal that we could outrun, we ate it to extinction, right? It's basically like a model of genocide and ecological disaster that follows humanity as it goes out. So the myth of the helpful hunt, the happy, hunter-gatherer living in peace, I think is a myth, and isn't one that helps, because it makes now wrong. It's like, where have we gone wrong? Whereas we were an animal always on the edge of extinction, always kind of largely a scavenger animal until we learned how to really hunt. And then from hunting, really we only started getting control when we got to the agricultural period and we could grow things. So it's from there, so we have that anyway. And then suddenly we have the agricultural revolution. And in the agricultural revolution, suddenly we can build wealth. We can stay in one place. We have to protect what's ours, even more than we did before. And we have to learn, because we can start to store stuff, grow stuff, we need to start to trade, right? So then suddenly you need a form of currency. So suddenly you've got things that need to be protected and are not disposable. So before, if I'd killed something big when I was a hunter and gatherer, the most sensible thing for me to do would be to give what was left over to you, right? Because then somehow when you've got it, you're going to think of me. But when I can store it, I've not got and I can produce more than I need, suddenly I can start building wealth. And with that wealth comes power. And so we then bring power into the equation. That isn't just the physical power we had before. It's the power of resources. From the power of resources, you have empire grows, right? So suddenly we've got enough resources to either go and buy that culture or go and take that culture over with force. So suddenly we have empire. And we see where that gets. But yet it's happened historically over and over and over and over and over again. The last kind of being the British Empire. And I would argue that the corporations are empires now. So we're still seeing empire. On top of that, we then get the Industrial Revolution. And in terms of masculinity, I think the Industrial Revolution is probably the biggest wound. Because suddenly, even in the smaller communities that we'd built, men were taken away from them. Men were taken away and put into factories. And the boys were taken away and put in schools. I mean, the girls were too, but there was a separation from father and son. And that killed off a lot of the trades. But also it meant that who was teaching you to be a man? So the dads just become these people that come home and discipline that the boys never see. And the boys are sitting there going, well, who am I like? I'm not like them, and they're not like these. And so boys start bringing up boys. The elders vanish from the communities. And Bell Hooks writes about this in her book brilliantly, The Will to Change. Boys become the guardians of the patriarchy. Boys raise boys. And that becomes dysfunctional very quick. And so suddenly dads are not there. And even for the men who are working, so that does damage to the son, but for the men that are working, we get stripped of what's really important to us. So one, sense of connection, right? I'm not working in the fields with the members of my community, the women and children all pitching in. Suddenly I go to this one place, and yes, I have a few people around me, but largely I'm disconnected, and I'm certainly disconnected from the family that I'm not seeing at home. We get disconnected from challenge. You know, although the work's hard, it's repetitive. It's the one bit. I'm no longer the shoemaker, the wheel maker, the tool maker. I glue the soles on the shoe. I put the lid on the toothpaste. That's what I do. We lose a sense of contribution in there, because before that, if we, when we worked, we knew that at the end of that work, whether that was getting going out hunting, or whether that was bringing in the crops, we knew that it was done. And we knew that that meant those around us could eat. It was okay. But now there was never a sense of okay. There was never a sense of the job being done. You could pay to get by. There was no real sense of this is making a difference, what I do. And lastly, celebration. You know, in every culture, there's some sort of ceremony to mark the end of harvest. And that would have been the men getting together and communities celebrating them and them celebrating. Now what you get? Like, you're just working. Suddenly you have to create ceremony, so you get the Friday night culture of going out and getting pissed with the people you work with. So it done a lot of damage. And I think you can see that in the depression that shows up in men's lives now. You know, if you, and I've worked with thousands of them, if you work with a man who's depressed, when you start working into it, you will find the inversion of those four things. So you will find a man say, I just feel really isolated, right? What's the opposite of connection? Isolation. I'm bored. Is this it? Is this what it's going to be like? There's no sense of, what's the inverse of challenge? Boredom. He will say, it all feels meaningless. I feel like whatever I do is kind of pointless. What's the opposite of meaningless? Well, contribution. It doesn't feel important anymore. And then the celebration one, like you talking with them and they'll just say there's no joy in my life. I don't feel appreciated. And I don't really have people to enjoy myself with. So they're not celebrated and they're not celebrating. So what's the antidote to that? Well, you've got to turn it on its head. You've got to bring those back in. You've got to bring some connection in. You've got to bring some challenge in. You've got to bring some contribution in. You've got to bring some celebration in. And if you look at how we would have worked before the Industrial Revolution, if you were depressed, which men can go to work depressed for years before anyone notices now. If you were depressed before and you would decide you weren't getting up, you weren't showing up, you weren't doing whatever, you were needed. So very soon there'd be a knock on your door, right? It'd be like, John, what's happening? You'd be like, yeah, I'm not feeling that good. We don't care. You're getting up, you're coming, because we've got to get the wheat in, right? Before the rains come. All right. So next thing you're out. Guess what you're doing? You're working with a group of other men. We all know men are happiest when they're working with each other, whether it be prodding a barbecue or building a fire. Like, we like doing stuff together. So you're getting a sense of connection being with those men. You're also getting a sense of challenge. It's going to be hard work. We've got to do it within a certain time frame. We've got to work together to do that. We might have to learn a different way of doing it. We also get contribution. This matters. This is important. This is so that all of our community can eat. And then when it comes in, guess what? There would be some celebration. Yeah, it was done. Job well done. Right? You helped. You played your part. So for men's lives now to be happy, I believe we have to find ways of bringing those 4 C's in. We have to find ways to make sure we're connected, that we are challenged, that we contribute, and that we celebrate.